Good day to everybody, and thank you for joining us in today's webinar titled Automate IBM Connections, Installations and More. This is the first of our series of webinars reviewing our sessions that were held at the Social Connections 12 in Vienna earlier this year. And my name is Danny. I'll be assisting Stöps today in the background of the webinar. A few things that I want to make you aware of before we get started. The first is that your phone line or computer microphones will be muted. Nevertheless, we do of course encourage you to ask any questions if you have them. You can do that in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar program. The webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes. That includes a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Stöps may decide to answer your questions throughout, otherwise we'll get to them at the end. And finally, today's presentation will be recorded and also be shared on our webinar page, the links to which you'll be sent in a follow-up email probably tomorrow. So with any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Stöps.
Okay, thanks, Danny. So welcome from my side too. So my name is Christoph Stöttner. As far as I can see, I know everybody who is in the audience, so welcome. You know me, I'm a consultant at PanAgenda. I do Domino stuff since nearly 20 years now, connections around 10 years, and my main experience are migrations, deployments, performance analysis, and so on. And I'm an IBM champion since 4 years, I think. So let's start with our session on automating installations or automating IBM Connections deployments. Some things about the idea and the history. We did several attempts to deploy connections automatically. I think we talked about it nearly 5 years now. I started Klaus Bild started a session in Stockholm for Social Connections 7 some years ago. We talked about the silence of the installers. Klaus did mostly response file installation on a single server, but it was possible to deploy multiple servers, but it was not very handy. So I think I never tried it in production. But I had it in my head for years now just to get an automated connections install, because it's just boring to click and configure response files or click through installers multiple times. You know, when you do something more than twice or 3 times, you forget something, it's boring. It's just not what I want to do during an install. So. And why do I need the automation? It's just doing demos, it's maybe a migration thing and testing. I need a new deployment because a new version was released by IBM and so on. So we have more reasons than everybody thought about it all the time. So, and I think it's not done with just providing response files, because editing response files is boring too, I would say. So let's try something different. So I got the idea of this session when I had my first look into the Orient.me installer for Connections Pink, because I found this one. There is a file which is named hosts, and there is a part in the document with master, worker, and proxy, and some IP addresses. So what's that? And I searched a little bit, and I found out, okay, IBM is using Ansible here for a big part in the deployment of IBM Connections Pink. So what's Ansible, or what tools are available for automating deployments for Linux and Windows servers? One step back, why do we want to automate an installation? I think I already said it, it's boring. I sometimes forget something. It's always the same. You have 4 or 5 servers to deploy stuff. To deploy WebSphere, you have to change the limits.conf, you have to change network settings, and install system requirements, and I often forget one server or I have a typo in another one. So it's better just to automate from the beginning of an install. So I normally install a Linux distribution like Red Hat in a minimal install, and then I put all the other stuff with an automation tool on it. It's easier to troubleshoot then, and I can be sure that all settings are in place, so I must not check it each time when I have to troubleshoot something. So which tools are available? I think the big three in the moment are Puppet, Chef, and SaltStack. Puppet is sometimes a little bit of cryptic. They have enterprise support. It's a cool tool, but I never came into it. There's Chef, and there is SaltStack. And there is Ansible. And Ansible is, I would say, quite cool. It's agentless, so you mustn't install any client on your servers you want to install something. So when I have 4 servers for a WebSphere Connections deployment, I can just start after configuring SSH. So that I like very much. Then the configuration is very easy to read because it's just YAML. YAML is sometimes a little bit difficult because it's just some spaces to group things, but it's just good readable and easy to use. And Ansible itself, it's easy because it's extensible via modules. There is encryption built in, so I can encrypt my passwords. I have a secure connection to my servers through SSH. It's written in Python. Even I, as an admin, can read Python or write Python scripts. And it's supported by Red Hat and the community. So I like Ansible. Let's have a look at the comparison slide. So Ansible is Python-based. There is no agent needed for the clients to install. And the config is based on YAML. Communication protocol is SSH, and it's not that difficult. Chef is difficult, uses SSL, so it's quite secure too. But the config is Ruby and often a little bit complicated. Puppet is quite okay, and SaltStack is Python-based too, but the communication protocol is 0MQ, and I never had a look into it. So I like the Ansible way. Why should you learn it? First of all, Ansible is built to administrate and orchestrate a lot of servers. So you can even do cloud orchestration. There are plugins for Docker and containers. So you can configure all the stuff in your network environment. There is a dynamic and static inventory, and they are using playbooks. About the wording, we are talking a little bit later. So I can use a playbook with multiple environments. So I write it once, and I just exchange the inventory file to deploy it on my test environment, quality management software environment, or my production. And here, the inventory example for one of my servers, I have a group IHS with a server and a WebSphere Deployment Manager group. So in the brackets, you see the group name, and then you put in the IP address or the host name of all servers. Just YAML. And it's a text file, so it's easy to keep in a source control system like Git or SVN. How does it work? So in Ansible, we have files with variables. We have a so-called playbook, and we have inventory files. So in inventories, we already talked about it. We are defining the servers and groups of servers. And the playbooks, we define what will happen with these server groups. And with variables, we can have a dynamic start when it comes to the configuration itself. And Ansible can deploy all of that stuff to VMware, Windows servers, Linux, Google Cloud, Docker, whatever you can think about it. It's just a server. Cloud is a server too, so you can deploy everywhere. SSH. I love SSH. It's easy to configure, it's secure, and when you configure the authentication through SSH keys, it's secure and easy to handle. Even when you have multiple keys, you mustn't remember any password or just the password of your. I always would secure an SSH key with a password. I don't like the passwordless SSH keys, but when you use SSH agent, you just import the key once when you start your session. You put in your password once, and then the SSH agent handles the authentication for you. So just create a key with SSH keygen or PuTTyGen on Windows, copy it through the server. It will be copied to .ssh authorized keys in the user directory you connect to, so root or any user you use on the Linux machine, and that's all. For each operating system I use, there are tools available. So on Windows, you can use PuTTY or Kitty. There is a page-on tool with it where you can import your keys. Just click on the links. You can have access to the slide deck, and you will come to the documentation and the latest download links. Same for Linux. You can generate SSH keys. You can copy them to the server. You can use X-Forward very easily on Linux and macOS, so you get GUI windows on your local machine, even when you work on the server run, and so on. On Linux, you can just use SSH add and the key file name, and it will import it to the SSH agent, and then you can use it without any password prompt after that. But what can help this with a connections deployment? Let's talk a little bit about the Ansible basic first. So a playbook is a collection of roles. So in a playbook, I can import other playbooks, and I can use roles. For the servers, I groups and server names in my inventory file. And last word here, the roles. A role is a collection of tasks. So let's define a role VM tools or VM. So on a server which is installed on a VMware ESX or in a VMware workstation for testing, I use normally a virtual machine. So I have defined a role VM where I install the VMware tools, where I start the VMware tools, where I mount some local shares, and so on. So it's just one role VM, and it deploys some stuff on all of my servers. How do I create my folder structure for a playbook or for Ansible? So that's a folder structure for a connections deployment. So I have a root folder where I put in my inventory files, and in the subfolder roles, I define the different roles for my tasks. So like common, VM, WebSphere Deployment Manager, TDI, and so on. I have a folder templates where I put the Ginger templates later for some response files. I have a library folder where I can put in some Python scripts to install my WebSphere stuff, because the WebSphere packages are installed through Python, but this can be imported from GitHub. And in group vars, I define some global variables like username and passwords, like my deployment manager hostname, and so on, just that I can use them in the different roles in that playbook. I already said it, in the root folder there are the playbook YAMLs, the inventory files, and here, for example, one of my roles, the installation manager one. Within the role installation manager, I have two folders. One defaults with main YAML. There I define the variables which are only used in the role installation manager, and I have a folder tasks with a main YAML file, and there I can define, or here I defined all tasks for that role. We have a look into that in some minutes. So back to our inventory file. So that's the inventory file for my test environment for connection 6. So there is a group IHS with one web server. There is a WebSphere deployment manager group, was DMGR, with one server. There is a was node group so I use 2 WebSphere nodes here, and I use a DB2 server. So I have a group DB2 with one server in it. You see, it's quite easy, it's readable, and that's all I need for inventory. And when I want to put that into production, I just exchange the server names. Here the start of my main playbook. In 1 you see a special entry for hosts. I don't use a group name or a single server name. I use the word all. So that means the 2 roles, common and VM, are deployed in all hosts in my inventory file. So I must not. I can't just use all server names in my inventory file and define them with all. Then in 2, I install the WebSphere requirements and the installation manager to IHS and WAS deployment manager group. And in the last line, I import a second playbook which defines the web server definition. There I import just the tasks for installing IBM HTTP server, WebSphere plugins, and so on. So quite easy. So we already got here for all servers we install common and VM. All servers in my connections deployment will have a single limits.conf definition. So for WebSphere, I need to extend the number of open files, for example. So I can just define in my YAML the name is open. So it's your decision if you want to name all of your tasks. I like to use names because then I see when the playbook is running which task is in the deployment in the moment, and I can see when there is an error what happens. So I just use a name like change limits.conf. I use the module PAM limits that's included with Ansible for the domain root. That means the root user will have hard and soft limit, that's a dash here, for a number of open files. Under number 2, the value of 65,536. And that's all. And this will set the ulimit for open files on all of my 5 servers in the inventory file. Oh, I forgot to put in the result. So the result would be root user, number of open files, 65,536. Then I like to configure the SSH server on my Linux servers. Just checking if there's a question. No, everything's good. So here you see a possible way to just edit a configuration file, the SSH config on your server, and use a regular expression to just check is x11 forwarding or x11 use localhost already set. And when it's set, just change the configuration to yes and no, or yes for forwarding and no for use localhost. And when it's not, comment out. This script will put in a new line with x11 forward yes and x11 use localhost no. And after that, I use a notify line. So always when that task is running and it changes something, it notifies a handler to restart the SSH server. But I can run that multiple times, and when there is no change on the server, the SSH service will not restart. So just once it changes the setting, then it restarts the SSH server, and after that it just ignores the restarting. It checks if everything is set, and that's all. So quite cool. Then package management. All of you know when I want to install Installation Manager or WebSphere, I have to deploy, let's say, 10 to 20 libraries and packages that my GUI of the Installation Manager appears, that all fonts are installed on the server, that all 32 and 64-bit libraries are deployed, and so on. I sometimes forget something of that, so I put that into my Ansible playbooks. But when you want to install on a SUSE server, you have to use zipper. When you install on a Red Hat, you have to install to use the package manager YAM, or when you use Debian, you have a package manager apt. For Ansible, that doesn't matter. When the package name is the same, you can just use the module package here, that one. Give it a package you want to install. I want to have the latest version, and that's all. So it doesn't matter if it's a Debian server, Red Hat, CentOS, or SUSE, it will deploy the package unzip on that machine. And unzip we need for a little bit later for our installation manager install, because there we unzip or unarchive the installer package to the machine. When I want to install multiple packages in one step, I can use the variable name item here, and then just add the with items statement here and the different packages I want to install. Just for your information, the package psmisc is needed by Red Hat and CentOS machines to use the manage profiles shell script, because the manage profiles shell script uses, I think, kill all, and kill all is deployed by the psmisc package. That was that. Okay, so. Same for the prerequisites. So when I want to install DB2, I have to install the libaio library, some compat files, and so on. So I put that once in my roles, and it deploys on all DB2 machines that 2, 4, 6, 7 packages. And here for one step more, only when the distribution is Red Hat Enterprise Linux, because on SUSE and Debian the package names are a little bit different. So I need 3 package parts in my role statement then for the different operating or Linux distributions. So I can just say, please install that packages only when the distribution is Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So one step more on the when statement. Then I normally disable IPv6 because I had several times problems with IP version 6 on WebSphere machines, so I normally disable them during the installation. Here we use the sysctl module and just add this 3 variables and put the value to 1. And then the IPv6 is disabled on that machine. After the installation, I enable them in a step where I set the value to 0. Here I mount a software directory where I put all my WebSphere packages and installation manager and DB2 into it. So I just mount a local directory in that case, but I can mount everything in my network. I show this here. I just want to show the shell module, because with the shell module in Ansible, you can just run any command on the console you like. So here we do unmount, and after that, mounting of the VMware share software to MNT. That's all. About the security, I already talked about the connection to the server is SSH. The configuration YAML files can be encrypted by AES 256. So I can really put passwords in them and just decrypt them during the runtime or during my playbook is running. So to creating a vault, just use Ansible vault create the file name. You can edit it and you can just encrypt the file when you forgot to create an encrypted one. So that's all, and then we just call the playbook later on, and the playbook will ask us for the password, and that's all. Here how do I run a playbook? The playbook is just the Ansible-playbook command -i inventory. So -i is the inventory file, all server names and group names. Site YAML is the playbook itself, and the -- ask vault pass will ask us for a vault password. And so the vault is decrypted, and all variables within the vault can be used. Or when I do not use a vault, I just can call it without the ask vault password. So we have an encrypted vault, so we can just define a user password. For connections, we create a database user, the LC user for DB2, and in that case, I put LC user password, very complicated one, into my vault YAML file, and in my DB2 role, I just use the user module name LC user, and the password is not just the LC user password variable. We need to hash it, that it is hashed within the etc shadow file on your Linux server. So Ansible does not hash it. You have to put in here a hashed password. But you can use the password hash algorithm here, and everything is fine. So now to the installation manager. There is a quite good module on GitHub from a guy who built some tasks and roles for the IBM Installation Manager installation. I forked that Git repository and made some changes, so you can use mine or the one provided at within this link. The cool thing of that role is that you can provide the installation manager setup files through HTTP. So the easiest way is just to start a Docker container with Nginx and say, please serve that directory where the installation manager archive is stored. So then you can reuse it in your Ansible environment. So within that role, we download and extract the package. That's the reason we need the unzip package in the common role before. After that, a silent install of the installation manager is running, and the last step here is that the extracted installer will be deleted. And we see the variable definition here. So the media host is just the web server where the installer can be downloaded. Then the IBM EM install location is the target directory where we want to install the installation manager, temporary location where we extract the installer package, and the version and architecture and so on for our install package. You can read all these variables from the installation manager package. It's all in the file name. And now we use this variables. So here is the role for installation manager. We create the temporary directory. We used tmpim, I think. Directory state in mode 755. And then we download and extract the installer. Here the variable for the web server, my folder structure where the package is stored, and the long one here, agent installer, platform, GTK, architecture, version tag.zip is the file name of the install package. So you can put multiple versions, multiple operating systems in that folder and just use the one you need on that server. Then we have a destination opt IBM Installation Manager. We have a remote source for the download, yes. And then we run the silent install. It's just go to temp location, start install, accept license, and so on, and it will install our installation manager on all 3 servers where we need it. So at the web server and the 2 WebSphere nodes. And I tested that on my local machine with VMware Workstation, and I would say I need about 60 seconds to install the installation manager plus all prerequisites on 4 servers. So it's quite fast, and it's much faster than when I do it manually. So it really helps during installation. Here the variables for WebSphere. The longest one is the repository file. So here I extracted all repositories I need for a WebSphere deployment, the network deployment, the supplements, Fixpack 11, Java update for Java 8, and 1 Fixpack. I put all that comma separated in 1 variable and reuse it in the installation manager call for the silent install. That's all. And here from the properties one, here we tell the installation that we want to have Java 8 for our deployment. When we want to install FileNet or Connections community libraries here, we just have to install with Java 6 first and then do an update later on. And last one here, deployment manager. Here is the host name where the deployment manager will run later. Just one example how we install it. It's a GitHub repository too, like the installation manager one, but here I use a local directory with all the servers. In this GitHub repository, you find a folder library. All content of that library folder copy to your library folder in your Playbook, and then you can use this Python scripts for the deployment. It's just the guy who wrote it did a really good job. He does a silent install, and then he uses the manage profile script and create the different profiles, the profile manager, the node, and so on. So really cool. And after the deployment, we do an update to Fixpack 11. That's all what we do here in the 2 tasks in that role. Here, just as an example, here we create the deployment manager profile, just defining some variables for that. We want to name it DMGR01, the cell name, node name. Sorry, here an unencrypted password. Maybe I should put it into the vault later on. And here a variable for the inventory host name. That's the deployment manager host name we saw before. And last, I start the deployment manager that I can add the additional application server nodes and to configure some other stuff. A word on templates. The WebSphere and installation manager installation was quite easy because we can just run a silent install. For DB2 and TDI, we need a response file for that. And the easiest way here is to use the Ginger 2 template engine from Ansible. So I normally do a silent install of DB2 and one for TDI on one of my VMs. I copy the response file to my templates folder of my Ansible playbook and just replace the different, here we see normally here is standing license agreement, I think true or no, accept or decline. So I just replace this accept with a variable we defined in our variable definition file. So here respond dot license agreement. So respond is that one, that's YAML. License agreement is this one. So resp dot license agreement accept. That's okay. Then prod is DB2 server edition. File is, what's file? Okay, the target for our installation, and the installation type just typical, compact, or custom, what you want, and the version where the software is extracted. Then we parse that response file into temp, and after that we call the db2 setup and give the response file, the parsed response file, as an option for the installation. So first of all, we parse the response file. Source is our Ginger2 template, destination where the parsed document is stored. We parse it, sorry. And after that, we install db2 11.1. We call the db2 setup with response file, which we parsed in the step before. That's all. And then it will deploy as db2. The LC user was created with a role before. Here again, an example for a shell command. Here I just combined some Linux commands to copy the license file from my software share to the local machine and then call the license manager from db2 as the user db2 inst1 and import the license. Because I sometimes forgot to import that license, then I have 45 days. When I remember that within the 45 days everything is good. When I forgot to import the license, connections or db2 will stop working after 45 days after installation. So better to automate that, then you can't forget it. Same for TDI. We have a response file, we parse it, we call the installer. Here a special thing, the TDI installer is searching GNOME or KDE during the setup. And when we have not installed any of that window managers, it will generate an error, and Ansible stops a playbook when an error occurs. So I don't like to install any GUI on my Linux servers. I think I have no one with GNOME on it or KDE. So I just put in here ignore errors, yes, and then I know the TDI installation went well. I tested it several times. It's installed, I can update it, and I can use it. There's just no GNOME or KDE installed. So here I use the ignore errors. Second step for TDI, updating it to fixpack 6. So I copy the update installer jar to the local machine, and then I call the update command for TDI, and the TDI update runs through in some seconds. That's all. And here, finally, we see that's the view when a playbook is started or runs. And when you remember, when you ever installed OrientMe or IBM public cloud or private, this cloud package, which is the base for OrientMe, that's the same view. They are using Ansible for that deployment. So it's good to know Ansible, because then you can check what happens during that installation, and you can use it for your own machines and for preparation to put everything in place for that install. I would say with Ansible, nearly everything is possible. You can deploy on multiple hosts, you can copy files, you can edit files, you can replace stuff, you can silent install, and so on. I use it to stop and start services. I think I jumped over one slide before, because one of the first slides was shutting down the firewall and disable SE Linux for the installation period. And so I install without the firewall. After the installation, I check which ports I need, put it into the firewall configuration, and start the service again, and everything is fine. So mustn't remember that I have to change something there, or I can edit the hosts file during a migration. It's a good way to just provide the connection server name through hosts, and that's all. You can manage Docker containers with Ansible. You can reboot your systems, and it's all multi-threading. So it's not like using SSH-C to run a command on multiple servers one after another. It's running multi-threaded, so let's say, reboot 4 servers in one step, and they come back all to the same time and not one by one. It works with Microsoft Windows. You can use Ansible with remote PowerShell to deploy Windows packages, to install MSIs, to enable and disable Windows features, to start and stop services, manage updates, execute PowerShells, or what I forgot, create users and groups. So it's quite useful. You can prepare your Windows machines too. It's not just a Linux, Unix one. And you can even use Windows Package Manager like Chocolate to deploy stuff on your Windows servers. It doesn't matter if you're an administrator or a developer, I would have a look at Ansible. We are all working with connections in the moment. We are working with Docker and Pink in the future or even now. So Ansible can help us save time. We can deploy different environments with one configuration setting. We just need to change the inventory file and all roles and definitions can run. It's just keep it stupid simple and it will run and work and you won't forget anything. Thanks, and now it's time for your questions. So when you want to call me and discuss something, here are all connections. I think easiest one is Twitter. And now I'm open for questions, and thanks for your time.
All right, thank you, Stöps. There is no questions at this point in time, but I'm sure that
I think, Danny, you need to remove the block for the microphone, or?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
You're talking now. It's not working. I just switched my audio. Give me a second. So I'm back.
Okay, I will try again now.
Now I hear you.
Fantastic. Okay, so there are no questions at this point in time, but I'm sure that once our audience has let the information sink in or they've rewatched the webinar on our webinar page, as you said, they can contact you directly or contact Panagenda. So with that, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today. Remember to keep an eye on the webinar page where you'll have a list of all of our upcoming webinars, including the next one of our Social Connections 12 series, which is on the 21st of November with Nico Meisenzahl. It's titled IBM Connection Admin Blast. On the same page, you'll also find all the recordings to the webinars, but as I mentioned earlier, in the follow-up email, you will have a direct link to the recording of this very webinar. So with that, I'd give Stöps the last word, and then I will end the webinar.
Okay, so thanks, Danny. Thanks for the audience, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.